Welcome back to my channel, Famous and Fabulous. Since my debut record in 1971, I have mostly performed music as a hobby. I taught myself songs that I heard on the radio, and you are familiar with all of Joan Baez's songs. The red-haired dynamo with a silky voice and a razor-sharp tongue when necessary, she is the queen of slide guitar. In a world dominated by men, Bonnie Raitt has spent decades gaining respect, not by drama, but with dignity. But tonight, she stunned everyone. Bonnie didn't hold back for the first time in her career. She called names. She has avoided conflict with or secretly detested 6 musicians. She fought twice as hard to be heard, not because of small-scale rivalry, but rather because of betrayal, hubris, and everything else. This list is about the truth, not rumors. Each of these names contains a narrative that Bonnie Raitt has never wanted to share until now, and she sings with kindness in every heartbreaking lyric. When it appears in old playlists, the first name still makes her cringe. Eric Clapton is the first person on her list whose name still makes her cringe when it appears in old playlists. Previously regarded as a peer or perhaps a blues kindred spirit, Clapton swiftly emerged as the first major letdown. Bonnie appreciated his playing, phrasing, and raw edge in the 70s. Behind the licks and reputation, there was something colder. He was fire on a fretboard, wild and magnificent. He didn't simply disregard her behind closed doors. Instead, he made sure she understood where he believed she belonged. Background noise at the second level. Not a guitar god, but a woman with a guitar. He interrupted her in interviews, took over conversations on stage, and ignored her opinions as if they were distracting. One instance of casual harshness never left her. A mutual buddy was informed by him that she was too courteous to be truly bluesy. It was erasing, not just insulting, as though suffering had to cry out to be genuine, as though a man's anguish was necessary for it to have any significance. Words weren't the end of it. Every room they shared was stained by Clapton's attitude. Bonnie would enter with her usual grace and go with her dignity intact but hurt, and gradually she stopped appearing completely. Out of choice, not out of fear. More than 2 decades have passed since they last spoke, and if Bonnie gets her way, they won't ever do so again, because some legends are better left unplayed and some walls aren't worth scaling. However, Clapton was not the only one who misjudged her. They began as partners. Therefore, another name came with even more resentment. John Mayer is the next. Musician she couldn't leave off the list, particularly following a botched attempt at companionship. Bonnie was intrigued when Mayer joined the blues scene. There was no denying his brilliance. It's to get ourselves, keep ourselves interested, and keep improving, and you know when you come up with a new song that you like the Lost Slobo song. Her sharp, polished approach and the kind of phrasing that made people sit up let her see potential, possibly even a torchbearer for the genre. She held out her hand as she shook and shook. She provided guidance. Instead, she received a lesson in ego from the haughty, contemptuous Mayer. He pretended that everyone else was only a guest and that the stage was his realm. He was more interested in being worshipped than in being genuine. When she asked him to perform with her at a festival set, Bonnie got a close-up look at it. What started out as a moment of sharing turned into a hijacking. He assumed the lead and continued to ignore her cues to finish. And when the audience applauded the band's unity, he disappeared silently. No appreciation, no recognition, he revealed. The set dragged to Rolling Stone the following morning. It was treachery, not just contempt. The last invitation he ever received was when she opened a door and he closed it behind him. For Bonnie, professionalism was only one aspect of it. Another was grace, the ability to know when to take the lead and when to listen. Mayer, on the other hand, never listened. The disappointment solidified into distance from that point on. One that she used to admire from a distance but was disappointed in person is the type that never heals. Sharper terms are appropriate for Don Henley sharp. Henley spoke and walked as though he owned every audience in every location. His work with the Eagles had been respected by Bonnie. How could she have missed the words, harmony, and cool detachment? However, that distance became something colder off stage. They performed a few benefit events together. In the late 1980s, Bonnie was eager to work with Henley, who was ready to give orders. He interrupted her in the middle of a practice, smirked, and once leaned in with a half grin and remarked, "You should smile more on stage. It softens you." Bonnie stopped. She was not surprised because she had heard similar things before, but rather because it came from someone she had formerly regarded as a peer, and she was positive that he would never have said it to Springsteen, Petty, or Clapton. He glanced past her as if she didn't matter, and it was more than just the words, the condescending tone with which he delivered his compliments. Though modest, the pain was more intense than a shout. She felt hurt in areas no one could see when she left that tour, and she carried that memory like a splinter. That kind of dismissal is quiet, but it reverberates, not lethal, but hard to forget. The following name after Henley hurt more because he wasn't simply impolite. He took advantage of her. The subsequent one brought with it a different kind of wound, one of manipulation and betrayal. Ted Nugent was that person. In the early 1990s, they met on a charity tour. Bonnie signed on with hope and heart, expecting an event that was neutrally cause-focused and an evening of music that went beyond politics. But instead, she entered a circus. Every moment on stage was a tirade against the guns administration and personal crusades because Nugent had taken over the podium. Noise was weaponized, not music, and Bonnie, who was backstage, felt as though her principles had been perverted into a billboard for something she didn't support. She felt deceived and caught up in someone else's propaganda. She quietly and decisively left after 2 performances. But Nugent didn't stop there. He made fun of her in interviews, calling her overly sensitive and accusing her of lacking the fortitude to deal with real America. He portrayed her as weak for putting her morals ahead of convenience. But Bonnie didn't crumble. She never turned around. It wasn't just contempt, it was eraser, because the guitar has always served as both a shield and an instrument for her, and no stage or platform was worth standing on if it meant standing next to someone who tried to silence her voice. Van Morrison was the next person to operate in silence, a quiet underminer whose coldness remained with her. Bonnie cherished his early recordings. She once described his voice as warm, golden, and somewhat haunted, like nightfall. On lonely nights, she would play his albums in hotel rooms, allowing his melodies to permeate the room like incense. However, the story of the man who created the song is very different. They were scheduled to perform together in London. Connie entered with dignity and great expectations, but Morrison never said hello or even looked at her. He strolled past her as though she were invisible, passed curt messages via staff, and refused to share a sound check. Bonnie didn't raise her voice when he told her manager that she was fine for the opening act, as if all of her years of praise and her skill were in vain. Instead of verbally retaliating, she went on stage that evening and gave a performance that rocked the walls. The audience, desperate for something genuine, gave her the standing ovation he never anticipated as her guitar boomed and her voice soared. Later, she observed Morrison's performance from the sidelines. His stage was tight and polished, but the energy was gone because the audience had already made their selection. Bonnie gained knowledge that evening. To injure someone, cruelty, doesn't have to be loud. The quietest rejection can occasionally have the longest reverberation. Kid Rock was the last name that she could never fully shake since it left a terrible aftertaste. It was always about principles and how a stage may be shared but never respected, not about skill. Bonnie knew what she was getting into when they appeared on the same bill at a summer festival in 2005, but it still managed to frighten her. She asked for a separate dressing room before the event even began. She had previously witnessed the type of energy he brought backstage, the crass jokes, the way he yelled commands at the crew as if they were beneath him, the arrogance drenched in cheap beer and entitlement, and the way he treated women like props. This was not because of ego, but rather because of dignity. He had the boisterous assurance of someone who believed that his notoriety permitted him to act cruelly. He then sneered at a promoter after listening to her perform and seeing her give a powerful crowd-silencing set. She didn't flinch or waste breath in her response. So is she always so serious? Since then, she has never played with the same lineup as him after packing her equipment and leaving. She still refers to that performance as the most depressing experience of her touring career, because it involved more than just one individual. It has to do with everything he stood for, a society where boldness tramples on respect and loudness drowns out grace, and Bonnie, with all her courage, understood that if she said nothing about it, she would be allowing that world to triumph. Bonnie Raitt remembers the dirt, even though she has always played clean. These are battle scars, rather than merely feuds. Every name is associated with a time when her voice was suppressed, her value was questioned, and her artistic abilities were disregarded. Behind the standing ovations are these unseen bruises. Bonnie never followed the rules, despite being instructed to smile more, talk less, and keep in her lane despite holding Grammys and receiving critical accolades throughout the years. She dug her own way with a guitar in one hand and grit in the other. She's done being quiet, smiling when she's told to, and acting as though respect requires keeping quiet about those who made the journey more difficult. Today, she didn't just talk, she named them clearly and with fire. Because for Bonnie, the truth has always been louder than any spotlight. And in a world where praise is frequently less expensive than integrity, she chose the one thing that has never let her down: honesty. This is not to start rumors, but to put her truth out there. Silence was never an option for her, so she called them by name, not for retaliation, but for reckoning. Not in reality, not on stage, and in Bonnie, Raitt's world, the truth is still more important than praise.